As we continue on our series of waiting patiently, we've looked at Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, and now we're going on to Joseph. Family dynamics and deceit and dissension really make for a family of many colors, kind of like Joseph's coat of many colors. Well, these patriarchs that we have been looking at follow the line of the covenant with God and the inheritance. Now Joseph is going to be a little different because Joseph does not follow after Jacob in the inheritance that we looked at last week. However, there is, outside of King David and Solomon, we see that Joseph has the most written about him in the Old Testament. From chapters 37, 39 through 50, is all about Joseph's life. So for that much material, it proves that not only is Joseph an important character, but one looks at how his life has played out, the hardships he endured, the lessons learned, and how the God of Joseph is really the God of us. Well, greed and jealousy and hatred and anger, manipulation and deceit can honestly pass from generation to generation. We saw last week how Jacob's deception and trickery and deceit has plagued him throughout his whole year. And now we see this going on to Joseph, because Joseph's immaturity, allowing daddy's favoritism and position, made for a really bad relationship with his brothers. Now if you remember, Joseph came from Rachel, and Rachel was Jacob's favorite. Now Leah had all the boys, and Rachel finally has Joseph. So to say that Joseph was daddy's favorite is an understatement. He was. And his brothers knew it, and they resented him for it. And to make matters worse, Joseph's dad gave him this very flamboyant robe. It's called the coat of many colors. Some of you may remember that story. But really what was behind that was just another display of favoritism on Joseph. Now, we really don't know if Joseph wanted the coat. I can only about imagine if you're getting picked on by your siblings all the time, you're probably not favoring the fact of having yet one more thing to be made fun of or to cause more problems. But this happens, and we don't really know if Joseph worked too much, but we can see that it's his brothers that are out into the field tending the sheep, and Joseph's back home with his dad. And his dad wants him to go check up on him. Well, before this happens, Joseph has a couple dreams. Now, the immaturity of Joseph shows up because instead of keeping the dreams to himself, he has no problem sharing them with his brothers. The first dream is that they were all out in the field, which, like I said, we don't even know if Joseph had been in the field, but they all had their big stacks of sheaves of wheat, and all of them bowed down to his, because his rises up bigger. And then the next one was that he saw the sun and the moon and the 11 stars, and they were all bowing to his star. Well, not only was his brothers ticked, but this caught the attention of his father as well. Jacob finally realizes the monster that he has created, because he says, "You mean to tell me that even your mother and I are going to bow down to you?" Now, here's a little interesting tidbit. What did Joseph say? He said 11 stars. But remember, Benjamin hadn't been born yet. So he was already seeing yet another child that had not yet been born. Well, as things go on, Joseph now is being asked to go out and check on his brothers. And as he comes to them, they see him off in the distance, and what is the remark? "Oh, here comes that dreamer. Let us kill him now." They despised him that much. I mean, you think that you fought like cats and dogs with your brothers and sisters, but to actually have somebody really want you dead takes it up a whole other notch. And as Joseph comes up closer, it is Reuben. If you remember him from last week, Reuben was the firstborn of Leah. He was the might how much his dad loved Joseph. And so he says, let's not kill him, let's just throw him in a pit. Because he had every intention of going and getting a rope and coming back and saving him later. Well, they say, okay. They throw him in the pit. And as Reuben leaves to go get the rope, or to check on the sheep, as he said, his brothers are munching on their lunch, and they happen to notice that there's a caravan of Ishmaelites coming to trade in Egypt. And they think, why kill him? We could sell him. Let's make a profit off of our brother. Oh, and then the blood won't be on our hands. Now, I don't know if you realize this or not, but the Ishmaelites are actually really their cousins, in a way. And so they bring Joseph out of the pit, and they sell him for 20 pieces of silver, which is pretty close in comparison to the 30 pieces of silver that Jesus was sold out for. So Joseph goes with the caravan. Now, to cover their tracks, the brothers concoct a story that, well, we're going to take it, we'll kill a goat, and we'll put the blood on his robe and take it back to Dad and make him think that a wild animal had gotten him. Do you realize that it was goat's blood again of the deception of the robe that was given to Jacob that parallels the goat's blood of the deception that Jacob used to deceive his own father in getting the birthright to Esau? Comes around, goes around. And Jacob is devastated, and nobody can console him. Well, Joseph finds himself in Egypt. He's bought by a man named Potiphar, and he is a commander in the Pharaoh's army. And Potiphar had a wife who liked her husband's new purchase. Joseph was very pleasing on the eye, and she tried everything she could to tempt him. And Joseph refused. His integrity stood strong because Potiphar had also put him in charge of everything in his house. Now, this is the interesting thing. This is Potiphar knew that the Lord was with him, and that Joseph had success in everything he did. Think about that. How would Potiphar know that the Lord was with him when he was an Egyptian and he didn't even know the Lord? There was something special about Joseph, and it showed through. And so Potiphar, here is a slave, one that is a foreigner no less, and he puts him in charge of his entire household and doesn't even worry about it. Until one day, when Potiphar's wife had been rejected for the last time, she gets mad and she grabs Joseph's coat as he's running away. There's kind of a theme with coats here, isn't it? And she cries rape. Potiphar becomes outraged, and he has him thrown into prison. Now, this is something that is also very interesting. There are a lot of scholars who think that Potiphar's job was actually the chief executioner. Rape and against a married woman immediately deserved the death penalty, and yet Potiphar did not. He threw him in prison instead. So Joseph should have found his life cut short, but he was spared. And why? Because the scriptures say that God was with him. Now Joseph had every reason to sing the woes. I mean, what had he done but serve faithfully? He didn't deserve this. It was all lies. Have you ever found yourself in that position or a situation like that, where you did everything right, you stood up for your beliefs, you were grounded in your values, and yet the worst happened anyway? You found yourself crying out, "That's not fair!" Or am I the only one that's ever said those words? That's not fair. Did you ever find yourself crying out to God, "Where are you? Why are you letting this happen to me?" Well, it goes on to say that the warden actually found a special heart. Joseph found a special heart in the warden's. And he put him in charge of everything. He didn't pay any attention to what Joseph did. He elevated him up as high as he possibly could in the prison rankings. And he's in charge of all the prisoners. So we have a guy who worked for the executioner, who was accused of trying to rape his wife, he was spared of the death penalty, and now he's elevated to doing whatever he wants in prison, and he was in charge just like he was before, only in a different venue. God was just asking him to be faithful and to serve. Now while he's down there, the Pharaoh had a chief baker and a chief cupbearer. And both of them had done something wrong, and they'd been thrown into prison, and they had dreams. They were very troubled, and Joseph asked them what the dreams were, and he interpreted them. He told the chief cupbearer that in 3 days he would be restored to his position with Pharaoh, and the chief baker in 3 days would basically have his head cut off. And in 3 days, that's exactly what happened. Now, Joseph had told the cupbearer, he says, now when you are restored to your position, remember me, get me out of here. But what do you think happened? The chief cupbearer was restored, and he forgot all about Joseph. Talk about unfairness. It just keeps getting worse. Yet he was faithful to God, and God was faithful to him. See, Joseph used that time in prison to learn some really life lessons through these trials. He learned trust, he learned loyalty, he learned honor, long-suffering, servanthood, but most importantly, he learned patience. But see, now the tide is about to turn. It has been 2 years since the chief cupbearer was restored to power. 2 years, he waited. But Pharaoh has a dream, and nobody can interpret this dream. And all of a sudden, the cupbearer's memory is jogged. And he's feeling a little guilty, and he goes, oh yeah, I forgot. There was this guy down in prison, and we had dreams and interpreted them, and they came true. And Pharaoh says, well, bring him up here. And so they bring Joseph up. So Pharaoh tells him his dream. And right away, Joseph's response is, I cannot do it, but the Lord, God, will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. He says the dream was this. It was a prediction of 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. And they needed to prepare. So the Pharaoh decides to put Joseph in charge of everything he has. And to have it come past just like Joseph said. He said, I want you to take 1/5 of everything every year. Put it into storehouses. I want you to oversee everything. In fact, nobody will be any greater in the land other than me. And everyone will bow down to you. And immediately the signet ring is put on his hand, and a robe of many colors is placed back on Joseph. And he's given an Egyptian wife, and he has 2 children. Now this is the interesting thing though too, because while Joseph was not in the line of inheritance for the Messiah, God promises that through his 2 sons, even though they are half Israelite now and half Egyptian, that they will still be in the inheritance of the covenant with God. Because Joseph was still one of the 12 tribes. So we see that the famine hits, and it comes just as predicted. Now what I find to be very enlightening is that we have Jacob, who's now become Israel. He's wrestled with God. He's put his whole trust in God, and the famine hits. And instead of turning to God for provision, what does he do? He says, I hear that Egypt has grain. And he looks to man. He looks to government for help instead of to God. In fact, that's what all Israelites did. Instead of looking to God, they started selling off. They gave them money. The money was out. They gave them their animals. When the animals are gone, they sold their land. And when the land was gone, they sold themselves. And hence, this is what's going to start up the whole 400 years of slavery of the Israelites to the Egyptians before Moses comes. See how that one act of disobedience, the one act of not relying on God to provide, set a chain of events The very promised land that God had just given Jacob again, Abraham, the land of Canaan, is now being sold off to the Egyptians. But it's through this series of events, God was not surprised by it, that Jacob sends his sons to Egypt to buy grain, and guess whose nation to fall on their knees before? But Joseph. But they don't recognize Joseph, because he looks like an Egyptian now. But Joseph recognizes them. And so he takes this time. He learns that he has another brother, a full brother. And so through his own little deceit and his own little plans, he sends them back because he wants them to bring Benjamin. And I want you to really read the scriptures of how that transfolds, because it's an unbelievable tale of reuniting a family that has got so much dissension and dysfunction going on in it. But the long story short, Joseph is reunited with Benjamin, and finally his father who thought his favorite son was dead, is now embracing him and kissing him once more. See, Joseph had a choice. He could have been a victor. He could have had revenge on his brothers. This was the perfect opportunity to get even. But he didn't. He actually took more after his uncle Esau in displaying grace and mercy and compassion. Remember when Jacob came back to meet Esau? He just knew that Esau was going to come unglued on him. And the opposite happened. The same thing is being shown right here with Joseph, as he so affectionately greets his brothers again. And he tells his brothers, he says, that which you chose to do harm to me, actually God has used for good. Because now he's been able to save his whole family. And so his family, after the goes before Pharaoh, and he says, let them have whatever land they want. And so the Israelites are relocated to the land of Goshen. As I thought of all this with Joseph, the scripture verse from James in the New Testament popped into my head as he talks about patience. It's in James chapter 1, verses 2 and 4. It says that indispensable character quality of patient trust can be learned only through trials. I'm going to say that again. Indispensable character quality of patient trust can be learned only through our trials. James teaches that without patience, there will be no maturity. And without trials and delays and disappointments, there will be no patience. We've talked about that. We can all wait, but we don't have to wait patiently. Patience is a daily dying to one's self, to look to servanthood, to look to God instead of our predicament. So I want you to know that when you find yourself in those challenging times, those unfair, the difficult, the frustrating circumstances, those that you feel you have absolutely no control over, remember God is still ultimately in control. And the best news is we don't have to be. That is way too much of a burden. We don't have to know what's right around the corner or what door he's going to open next. He just asks us to wait patiently. Be willing to endure those hardships. And instead of complaining and worrying, to look at being his servant. Who can we serve next? Who has God put in our path right now that we can serve? Instead of worrying about what God has planned around the corner. You know, God is with us in all things and in all times. And there is no prayer that we can possibly ever utter that he does not hear. We just need to remember that just because he doesn't answer right away or the way we want, he is not neglecting us. He just wants us to be patient. And just like Joseph, sometimes he has a way big, greater yes